Welcome to Voices from Cambridge, a podcast about the people behind the university.
In each episode, we explore their journeys and what Cambridge has meant to them.
We are your hosts, Annie
and Alia.
Our aim is to open up Cambridge and share conversations that connect and inspire.
With a special thanks to the Wolf Institute for hosting us. Thank you for being here.
Today, we are pleased to be joined by Professor Chris Bickerton. Chris is a professor in modern European politics at POLIS, Cambridge, and an official fellow at Queen's College. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Could you start by telling us about your Cambridge journey? What first brought you here and what has kept you inspired to stay in Cambridge?
Okay. I came here for a job, quite simply. Before taking up my job here in Cambridge, I'd never been to Cambridge before. I was a student in Oxford for a long time, but hadn't visited Cambridge, so I came for the interview for the first time. That was back in the summer of 2013. I was living in Paris at the time, and so then I arrived at the end of the summer 2013 to take up this job, and have stayed ever since. And I had moved around quite a lot before, so it's a good question as to why did eventually I stay put once I got to Cambridge. Probably for the same reason that many people stay, I think. It's a combination of the quality of the institution and the kind of people that are there and the kind of intellectual atmosphere which it encourages. And there is also at least from my view, this is a very personal thing, there is a high quality of life. I'd come from living in a very big capital city. I think Cambridge is the kind of place where I feel a bit more comfortable. So on the personal side, I got settled here, started a family here, and then moving is obviously much more complicated from that point on. So there's a bit of momentum that's built in. But really it was just, I think, professionally, there was never really any desire to go anywhere else because I felt, very happy here.
Very rooted.
Very rooted and intellectually supported, I think.
Fantastic. What do you think Cambridge does to keep its academics here well?
It's a very good question. There are some things it doesn't do, so it doesn't pay us particularly well. If the Vice-Chancellor is listening to this, she can take note. So it's definitely not...
We hope to have...
You hope to have her on. Okay, we can maybe ask her that question.
Okay.
So it's not that, it's not that we're deplorably paid, so you can survive. No, I think it's the intellectual freedom is something which I'd always taken for granted. I suppose I'd maybe thought of it as just the way universities are, which came from my time as a student in Oxford. But then I worked in a number of other institutions where I think I had a sense of how life can be very different elsewhere. Some of the places I worked, there was a very strong pressure from the administration on the kind of research that you did, not really in terms of censorship, but more in terms of funding. People who get grants do research, other people teach. Things like sabbaticals had been phased out. Everything was done through grant income, which some people get on the sort of gravy train of grants, other people don't, and that creates a lot of inequality between faculty. I was also teaching in some other places where there was a lot of political pressure, politicised environments where government agendas were very present. So coming here, I think one of its main virtues is that, at least as far as I'm concerned, nobody has ever said you should do this rather than that. Right. As long as what you do is serious, is considered serious, is intellectually worthwhile, you're really given the freedom to do it. And I think that's probably something that we can't take for granted, certainly not in this day and age.
That's what many of our other guests have been saying, the intellectual freedom, and it's really interesting. Can you tell us a bit about your research, what you teach, and how those interests have evolved during your time here?
Sure. I don't know if they've changed that much. No, that's not true. Actually, they have changed. There are different sorts of intellectuals, I think, or different sorts of academics. Let's say there are two sorts. There's one sort who pretty much study the same thing, I think, in various ways across their career, in a really a huge amount of detail, and I think probably stay within that field or that subdiscipline for their career. I think I probably are more like another kind, which is somebody who moves about a bit. So I have actually researched different things over the course of my career. Broadly, I'm a Europeanist, which is to say I've studied European politics and society for most of my research career. I think it's not that I'm not interested in other parts of the world. My PhD was in international relations, and I think I had always assumed that actually my intellectual interests were not necessarily within Europe. But over time, I think I've become increasingly interested in studying European politics, European societies, and that's become my focus. Sometimes it's more empirical. Sometimes it's more about particular countries, particular institutions. I worked on the European Union for a long time. Sometimes it's more theoretical. So some of the work I've done has been about democratic systems, political parties, thinking about the relationship between experts and expertise and what role that plays in contemporary politics. But with this constant sort of empirical focus, I think, on Europe, which is a kind of romantic attachment, I think. I think I'm just too connected to sort of European culture and cultural life in Europe of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I mean, it's very sort of, there is a kind of emotional attachment to that, which probably informs my research quite a lot.
Fantastic. And what do you think what Cambridge means to you personally? And when you think back to your first days here in Cambridge, how does that compare to how you see the uni now?
I mean, I think what it means to me personally, more than anything else, is a home, I think. Cambridge is where my daughter was born.
Nice.
It's her home. It's the only city that she's known as, where she grows up. So seeing it through her eyes, I think that's probably the way I've come to think of it. My experience of the geography of the city is through parks, cycle rides. The school run is probably the main thing that sort of determines my movements around the city. So there is that emotional attachment to it as a sense of, where I've made my home, which obviously wasn't there at the beginning. At the beginning, it was rather sort of an alien place. I didn't know it at all. I had a few connections professionally with people, but not particularly. So I knew it, I think, as an idea more than anything else. And for somebody who's grown up through the British educational system, which I had, Cambridge as an idea is a bit like Oxford. They're often put together as Oxbridge. And basically they represent the pinnacle of academic achievement if you're a teenager. And if you're in an academically ambitious school, I was in a grammar school that was a boys' school, and we would have every morning when we had assembly, it was in this big hall, and there were these boards sort of high up in the hall, and it had a list of names of former students. And the only ones that were listed were the ones that were admitted to either Oxford or Cambridge. And it had the subject and it had the college, and that was it. And I remember looking around at those boards as I was, because I went to that school in year 9, so I started doing my sort of GCSEs. And I remember thinking, I want to be on that board. So that's probably what Cambridge meant for me, actually. I knew some people who went there, especially to do the sciences, and so I thought of it as that sort of, place where high achieving students went to. So when I arrived here, I sort of adjusted to how it is, but that was my initial impression, I think.
Great. If you could go back and tell that boy in year 9 something about Oxford or Cambridge, what would it be? What kind of advice would you give him for potential students?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I would say that there's no reason why it shouldn't be this place that you have this ambition to go to. Ambitions are very valuable. They are part of what makes us human beings, I think. Some people are more ambitious than others, obviously, but it's something that drives people, and that's something very healthy. But over the years I've been here, and I've been here sort of for just over a decade now, I've done a lot of admissions. I've admitted a lot of students in my subject. I'd say probably most of them have done well, have thrived, but definitely some of them have ended up in the wrong place. And it's not really somewhere where they've been very happy. So I think I would say to this, year 9 boy, to think a bit about themselves and what they enjoy. And if they want to come here, it's because they are really, without forcing it, without any attempt to do so, they are just really interested in what they study. And when they go and study and when they do schoolwork, they don't feel as if it's some enormous chore. They just like it. And it's almost something quite natural for them. If that's not the case, and there's many people who are not like that, then someone like Cambridge is not a great environment because you find yourself just forced to do a lot of work as an undergraduate and probably you don't enjoy it so much. And you find yourself a bit out of sync with maybe your peers. So think about other places where it's maybe better to go. So maybe to be a bit more open-minded. I mean, I wanted to study politics, philosophy and economics. I wanted to go to Oxford. If I hadn't have got in, I'm not really sure what I'd have done. I'd have been fine, I'm sure, but it would have been a bit of a blow to my ego.
Yeah. You're a fellow at Queen's College. What makes Queen's special to you, and how does the college environment shape your work and daily life?
I spend a lot of time at Queen's. I do have an office in my department, and during term,
Which is very nice. It's the most beautiful library that I've ever seen in any Cambridge office.
Oh, wow. Okay. Can I come and visit?
Only on condition that you don't make any comment about what is undeniably also a messy office. And the piles of books have an order to them, but it may not be apparent when you first come in. So, I mean, Queen's has been a place which has offered me a great work environment. And I've worked there. Most of my intellectual sort of projects, books and things have been written in various forms there. I mean, I do have a place in my department, and in term time I spend, quite a bit of time there to do with lecturing, to do with meetings. The administration of the department is run from there. So one of the difficulties, I think, in Cambridge is everybody has these two hats, and it's not always easy to juggle. The most frustrating thing is wanting a book and realizing it's in the other office. So I do spend time in my department, but Queen's is a sort of working environment. It's where I think and read and write. Colleges are set up to provide for you to make life just easier. Lunch is there, so you can go down and have lunch. The porters at Queen's are absolutely charming and a friendly face whenever you arrive. Queen's has also been a place where I've met friends or people become friends. Again, the connection through family. Queen's used to have a nursery. It used to have a nursery inside the college. And I remember this was, I think, in 2015, 2016, maybe 2016. I was finishing a book, and the children of the nursery would be taken around the college gardens
That's nice.
for their sort of outing. And some of them, were crying in their prams. And I would always look over to see whether it was my daughter who was crying or not. And I'd sometimes see her play on the lawn on the other side of the river. So that's the kind of place that the college has been. I think it does have this environment to it, which is, not just part of your professional life, but also it blurs into your personal life.
Yeah, it's home.
It feels like a kind of home. Yeah. And so over the years, I think that's what it's done. But it's mainly been a place which gives you the kind of ability to withdraw from the pressures of everyday life and to work. So it definitely has an ivory tower quality to it, for good or for ill.
And are there parts of Chem life that still surprise or inspire you even now?
Parts of
Cambridge life
that surprise or inspire me. I think I never really take for granted my surroundings, I think. I remember I had a friend of mine who was a colleague of mine at the University of Amsterdam, who's still a very good friend of mine, and we worked together in Amsterdam. He had his office next door to mine. And we, at the time, the University of Amsterdam was based in the Canal District, quite literally a stone's throw from the red light district. So it's quite a colourful place to work, but also very beautiful. And I remember he said to me once, he said, yeah, you should never underestimate the ability or the capacity to have, or the, actually, no, he said the importance of having beauty in your everyday life.
Absolutely.
And I think I don't take that for granted here.
Yeah.
When I come into work and I see the college, I cycle through the city every day. There's many things that I enjoy looking at all the time. So that continues to inspire me, I think.
Amazing.
I mean, there are parts of Cambridge where it's like walking through a movie set.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite incredible, I would say.
Yeah.
And also on the note of the porters at Queen's College, yeah, they are very nice, considering they have so many tourists coming by all the time.
That's right. They maintain a very friendly face.
Yeah, absolutely. How has Cambridge shaped your research and writing and how you teach and approach ideas?
I think it has done all of those things in different ways. One way is that it hasn't obliged me to go in any particular direction. That's important. It's given me that freedom. I have had, friendships with people from other fields, completely different from mine. And these are people who are very clever people. So the threshold for explaining an idea to somebody who's maybe a friend but who works in a completely unrelated field is very high. So that's very stimulating, I think. I've often had great conversations with, a close friend who's a mathematician about European culture and politics. So in that sense, I think the environment, the people who are here are a source of sort of stimulation. I think the boundary between teaching and research is pretty blurred. I mean, as graduate students, you may have experienced this. I find myself sometimes with my own PhD students, for example, or in a graduate seminar. I have also found this teaching undergraduates, usually when you're in a very limited format with maybe one or two students and you have a student who's really particularly bright, you have conversations which actually can help you think a bit about your own research in new ways. The university has always been very accommodating, my department at least, to allow me to teach things related to my research. So I've taught a graduate seminar on themes that I developed in a book for a number of years now, and every year that's a great source of inspiration for me and new ideas. And so I do the same in my undergraduate teaching, and I have found sometimes discussions with students in supervisions on topics which I'm actually writing about or researching.
Just to get some inspiration.
Or they just give me ideas, or they help me explain something in a certain way. So I find that, in all of these different fields, I think Cambridge has played an important role.
You kind of answered my next question, which was about, because you work with so many different students and so many years now, how they inspire you and what they thought you over these years.
What they have thought of me? That's a good question. I don't really know.
Thought of you and they thought you.
Or what they taught me?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think it is possible to exaggerate this. It's not that it's such a two-way street. Students can give you comments and perspectives on work that you're doing because it comes up in courses that you teach. But you are still imparting your knowledge, and there's that element of, the boundary between the teacher and the student is not completely effaced. The only point where it is effaced is maybe towards in the course of a PhD student's life, you feel as if they evolve into actually an intellectual interlocutor.
Do you have a lot of PhDs?
It fluctuates. It fluctuates between, there are times where people have finished and the new students that are coming in, some of them don't get funding, or some of them are not working on topics that I'm interested in, so I might have none at some point, up to maybe 6, I think was the most that I had, and I felt that was too much. So we always try and aim for maybe 2 to 3 students over time.
6 is a lot.
6 a lot. Yeah.
It is too much, yeah. I think I inherited a couple from other people, and but every year I'm excited at the applications, and there's usually 1 or 2 people who I really hope can get a place. Sometimes they don't, because in my department at least, there's a ranking we do, and it is extremely competitive. So even grades that are maybe not quite top, you sometimes get ranked low, and so they don't get an offer. But But yeah, so with PhD students, sometimes you feel as if you actually have some sort of intellectual, partner that you can discuss ideas with.
What are some of the conversations you've had with PhD students or undergrads that has stayed with you?
The danger there, I suppose, is to think of the ones that are the more recent ones, which is just a product of my memory. One of the most enjoyable things I remember doing with one of my PhD students was we ended up boxing together, which I know isn't really an answer to your question, but he was a Spanish PhD student, Jose, and we got on very well, very good student, was working on some interesting stuff, but also wanted to learn how to box. And so I taught him how to box and created this little crew of sort of boxing people, postdocs and also students. So that was fun. I think what I found sort of interesting is often that these are students who have very wide interests. So one of my sort of interests is definitely to read. I read pretty widely. Often fiction, sort of literature, not necessarily just my own research books. And so some of the most memorable conversations I think I've had with PhD students over the years have sometimes been about things that they like to read, which may be things that I actually don't know that much about. Some students have introduced me actually to literatures that are familiar to them because of the countries they're from. So certainly discussions around films and also fiction, I've learned a huge amount, and often I've had students who've suggested things to me that I didn't know, and I've read them, and I've been really happy that I read it. So these kind of wide-ranging conversations that don't really have any fixed borders, I think are great.
And do they also challenge you?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it takes a certain personality to be able to challenge somebody who's obviously in a position of authority, and so some people hold back, I think. But they do, I think. I mean, I try not to be too sort of closed in that respect, or to be too sort of strict or anything like that. I'm not particularly hierarchical, I hope, as a person. So sometimes that facilitates conversations. And yes, I do think, I think I've had feedback on stuff that I've written from, graduate students that has definitely been critical, and that's been really useful.
This is why I love Cambridge, because coming from a different system of education, Germany and Armenia, there is so much hierarchy, which I've never seen in Cambridge. And that's something that I really appreciate about Cambridge, that you can always have any sort of conversation with any of the professors. Well, at least they're always very open to listen to you and to discuss things with you, which is very much not the case in other educational systems, where there is a very fixed hierarchy, and you are at the position of just listening to your professor.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yes, I think it's there is a difference, a cultural difference, I think, between British higher education and some other national systems. I think that's true. I taught in France, and France is a bit like Italy is another example, very hierarchical systems where the professor is a kind of boss, like a sort of real authority figure. And around them you have these sort of teams of people trying to get some attention. It's partly a product of the teaching system, where often professors give these lectures to, in the case in Paris, I sometimes had 500 students in the lecture hall, where you become a kind of actor. There's so many people listening to you, you can't interact with any of them.
Performance.
It's a performance, yeah, absolutely. You have this microphone and you sort of feel like you're acting a bit, and you don't know anybody it's just a sea of faces. The only people that I would notice when I was giving a lecture would be anyone who had a moustache. You always notice a moustache. But I didn't know the students, so Cambridge is very different in that sense, but also I think the British system is quite different. But I would say you can go sometimes a bit too far. There are elements of hierarchy. I think they're just a bit more informal. The fact that a student might call me Chris doesn't always take away what are these relations of power and authority. And Cambridge, I think, does have a tendency to put a lot of emphasis on your intellectual authority. And so people who maybe are particularly well known in their fields really do command a lot of respect, but also authority. So there is a kind of intellectual hierarchy, I think, that establishes itself. The currency is the currency of ideas, but it's still a kind of currency. So some people are more approachable than others as well.
Yes.
But it's true. I think that depends a lot on personality. Whereas some other countries, it's systematic. It's really part of the system.
Yes, I mean, in Armenia, I could never go and have a discussion with a professor,
let alone a cup of tea.
Yeah, whatever I said, that's it. Just go and learn.
What are some of the challenges that academics are facing today in Cambridge?
I mean, some of those challenges, I think, are general challenges that face the higher education sector. And I'm sure if you speak to the university's vice-chancellor, she'll tell you that it is a challenging time for the sector. Cambridge has the advantage, I think, that it never really has a problem of numbers. Students want to be admitted to the university in greater numbers than there are places. So the worry that student numbers might tail off isn't really a problem that the university faces. Its reliance on international students isn't in the same way as other institutions in the UK have become reliant on international fees. So Cambridge, I always feel, has felt a bit like a bubble within a sector which is struggling. But that's not to say that that bubble is completely impenetrable. There are definitely winds of change that run through it. I find there's an element, since I arrived, even there's an element of bureaucratization and growing administrative burden. Cambridge, I think, is changing as a city. It's growing. The industries that generate revenue are different. It's not dominant. It's not a quiet market town dominated by the university in the way that it was 30 years ago. That puts a lot of pressure on people in terms of where they live. I think the quality of life is impacted by worries people have about transport and schools and the price of houses, and these things affect university staff as much as anybody else. If you're a postdoc trying to get on the housing ladder in Cambridge because you've managed to get a permanent position, you're in a really difficult spot. It's really not an easy place to do that. So these are challenges that I think that the university has to face as well. So the challenges of a growing city are challenges the university has to face as one of the main employers in the city.
So Cambridge has a voice beyond the university walls. What role do you think it should play in shaping public debate and addressing the major political questions of our time?
That's an excellent question. There are lots of different aspects to that. I would say, so two elements occur to me first. One is, I think, the Cambridge teaching model and the way in which it puts the emphasis on these pretty intense conversations between professors and students in the context of 2 or 3 people together in a room, these supervision, this small group teaching model, which is associated with Oxford and Cambridge in particular, I think is remarkable and exists as a kind of beacon of what it's possible to aim for in teaching around the world, and definitely has a lot of attention in other parts of the world who are trying to emulate it or understand where it comes from and how it works. It's very hard to finance, so it's very hard to replicate. But I've had people, coming into supervisions from other institutions, other countries, other parts of the world, and being amazed at this teaching model. So in a sense, Cambridge, I think, can communicate this idea that what it imparts to its students is not what they learn actually, but it's how they think. And shaping how somebody thinks is something you can really observe and try and emulate. So that's one thing. More broadly, though, I think there are a lot of themes in, I would say, global politics. The main struggle I think Cambridge probably has is being a unabashedly elitist institution, because it selects students pretty remorselessly. Sometimes the ratio is 10 applicants to 1 place. I mean, it's very hard to get in. So it's an explicitly elitist institution in an anti-elitist age. And so the position that places like Cambridge have in a world where people are increasingly willing to challenge knowledge and the authority that comes with places that produce certain kinds of knowledge. Why should researchers in Cambridge be believed more than anybody else? Is a question which we'd have never asked 100 years ago, but I think is a question which everybody would ask today. So there is a kind of crisis in knowledge production, which is to do with a much broader sense of distrust that people feel vis-a-vis institutions, not just political institutions, but also universities. I think probably Cambridge has to think quite hard about how it wants to operate and maneuver itself within this sort of environment. And something I think it can do is it can actually try and understand this. Rather than double down on its elitism, I think to try and understand where this sentiment is coming from, what its origins are, I think that would be a contribution that it could definitely make.
And if Cambridge itself were a political actor on the global stage, how would you describe its role, and would you want it to change?
That's difficult. The question would be, if it was a political actor on the global stage, to whom would it be accountable and how? I mean, it could be this big technocratic sort of power, but that's not the kind of thing that I would support. I don't think universities should be political actors on any stage. I think they should focus on what they do, and maybe they help us understand some of the big forces shaping global politics and contemporary politics. At the very least, I think if there has to be some sort of intervention, I think it probably would be to try and defend the production of ideas, also defend ideas for their own sake. That's something I've always valued in Cambridge, that there's not a need always to justify the ideas you have because they are useful for some purpose, because they can serve some goal other than simply the ideas themselves. That sort of intrinsic value in blue skies thinking, I think, is something which Cambridge could try and defend at a time where there are increasing demands on what universities should do and what their contribution to society should be.
Yeah, that was a very thoughtful answer. Thank you. You've been here since 2013, so you've published that, over a decade. What is your favorite Cambridge tradition?
That's a good question.
This is my favorite question.
Is it really? Okay. I feel under pressure to answer it in an interesting way now.
In any way you want.
I suppose there are quite a few Cambridge traditions. Is there anyone that I particularly like? I mean, there are some of the sort of obvious ones about the wining and dining, things like high table, things like end of term feasts. I think these traditions are good, I think, and they lend themselves probably above all to sort of good stories to tell. It's nice if you have a guest to invite them to something like that because people find it interesting. And you do find yourself sometimes in a candlelit room surrounded by portraits, and there's all this wooden paneling around you, and you have the port being passed around, and you're sort of not quite sure if you're living in a story or a film or a real life experience. Usually the wine contributes to that sense of doubt. I'm not sure if those are my favourite Cambridge traditions, to be honest. I would say maybe the thing I like most about it, I think, is for somebody who probably on balance is a bit of a cerebral sort of person, I have to admit, being able to meet up with people that I've known for years and have conversations that are always stimulating for me intellectually, and not to feel as if I have to battle to find somebody like that, but just these are people that you meet and that become friends. So I have friends who I see sort of fairly regularly, and we have interesting conversations, and it is a kind of tradition, I think. So maybe that's one of the favourite things I like about Cambridge, is feeling not out of place and not having to go out of your way to seek those conversations. And they can take multiple forms in multiple places. It doesn't have to be at the dining table on high table. It can be in a pub, in some part of the city. But I find those sorts of conversations enjoyable. And I do remember once when I was living in Amsterdam, it's not to say that there's not an intellectual tradition in the Netherlands, absolutely not. So I don't mean to say that. But I remember going to a party, I can't remember whose it was, and bumping into somebody, and they asked me what I did, and I said I was teaching at the university. And this was somebody who was in business, I think, and he showed no interest in that whatsoever. He was always disappointed. This is not an interesting person to talk to. And I think in Cambridge, there's a fair chance that you meet somebody who understands a bit what you're doing, and you can have an interesting conversation, and you never feel too defensive about the fact that you're a university academic. It's just part of the texture of the city. So that's probably something that I'm not really sure that's a tradition. I feel like I've not quite nailed the answer to that.
No, I think like you can also create your own traditions within the city. And
Exactly.
I have friends that I met in my MPhil year, and we've created our own small traditions as well, and it's been really nice.
Yes.
Yeah, agree.
It's a place full of traditions where you also create your own traditions.
That's right.
The Master of Jesus College said, I think it's 2 years to create a tradition.
Oh, really?
It takes 2 years.
It takes 2 years,
Wow.
yeah.
At least, probably.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks,
for
Chris,
joining
for joining.
us. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic.